We're not even treating that here. So he goes on in point 22, abolishing private money creation can be achieved with minimal disruption to current banking operations, regulation, and supervision. That's just a claim, you know. And why would you do this without disruption to current banking operations? When those banking operations are criminal, they're criminally imposed upon us. They were imposed in betrayal of political promises that a central bank would not be created by the very party that Dennis Kucinich belongs to, and those practices are terminal. So why would you even want to do this without disruption to banking operations? He goes on, the creation of money by private financial institutions as interest-bearing debts should cease once and for all. How can you do that if you're attempting not to disrupt current banking operations? After all, you have all these outstanding debts which are subject to interest. There are contractual obligations to pay interest at this time, assuming this was representative of wealth that was in the possession of the banks, when in fact all money comes into existence as evidence of our own promissory obligations to each other. So the whole thing is based on a lie. But why aren't you not even arguing omnipotently the reasons why interest-bearing debts should cease once and for all to exist? I invented this term, interest-bearing debt. Now, it has been pointed out to me that in the past it was used. One case has ever been pointed out. And in fact, the document in which that term exists from approximately 100 years ago, in fact, it is not even clear why the term would exist in the document. But of course, the whole reason for developing the term, which was unknown to me beforehand, is this the reason was that we needed something to describe the nature of this obfuscation of the currency, so that from the nature we could understand its consequences, that these are interest-bearing debts, that is, our promissory obligations, which are actually obligations to each other, which are treated as if they are debts to a bank when they are not debts to a bank, and subject to interest as if there was some risk to property of a bank, when in fact the principal, when it's paid off, should be retired from circulations. So serious readers will note the plagiarism here. Together with the facts, Kucinich and Zarlinga expose their inability to articulate the nature and necessary substance of money, as would resolve our problems. In fact, they are creating further problems by the phrasing of just these few points. But yet to do so, like this person who had written me, they use my very words. I myself invented this term, interest-bearing debt, as a necessary element of my proof of the inevitable failure of any purported economy based on interest-bearing debt. Now, if you studied my mandate for mathematically perfected economy and absolute consensual representation, which has been online for several years now for public input, feedback, criticism, you'll notice the very replication of its structure in Kucinich's so-called need bill he introduces to the House of Representatives recently. It states in its first paragraph, to create a full employment economy as a matter of national economic defense, to provide for public investment in capital infrastructures, the thing that mathematically perfected economy solves, to provide for reducing the cost of public investment, which is really irrelevant, to retire public debt, which mathematically perfected economy alone accomplishes, in a right way, as we've explained in all these previous programs, to stabilize the Social Security retirement system, the very thing that this transformation to mathematically perfected economy, which I proposed in 1979 to the Reagan administration, and has been online ever since 1983 and 4, the very thing that I use necessarily as a vehicle for reflating the circulation in this entire bill does not even explain how or how that math works. And it's perfectly and unequivocally stated in the bill that they're imitating, my mandate for mathematically perfected economy, to restore the authority of Congress to create and regulate money. Doesn't even say how. But in the rudest terms, which are insufficient to engender or to produce or to maintain immutable tokens of value, which my bill proves are the only solution to our problems. To restore the authority of Congress to create and regulate money, modernize and provide stability for the monetary system of the United States. Well, what do you mean modernize? You either have a solution or you don't, and it's not a matter of modern. A solution is timeless. There is one and one only way to monetize our production justly. He goes on to say retire public debt, which I've advocated for years, and explain, in fact, in detail, how there is one and one only right way to do so. And he goes on and reduce the cost of public investment for other public purposes. In truth, solution does away with the idea and need for investment, because in fact we monetize our ability to produce by purchasing the equipment, resources which are necessary to do so, by assuming a promissory obligation. The idea of investment for profit goes out the window in a system which can monetize production without any undue or redundant cost whatsoever. Mathematically perfected economy and mathematically perfected economy only accomplish that purpose. Then, in the pattern of contemporary politicians, Kucinich goes on to give this bill a short title. He says, this act may be cited as the, quote, National Emergency Employment Defense Act of 2010, unquote. In other words, so he can call it, of all things, need. But what does this have to do with anything? I'm going to pick out a few points in this bill, and that'll be that. He goes on to cite as reasons vast unemployment and other consequences of this economy, but not attributing it to a process which is intrinsic to this obfuscation of the currency, which is responsible for these problems, but which is not only responsible for the problems, but which is a responsibility to understand in absolute terms in order to author an actual solution. In a point number 12, then, he goes on to expose his lack of understanding of these issues by stating the monetary policies of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System have compounded the economic crisis by failing to take decisive action to move the economy forward. Mere ambiguous terminology and assertions which cannot be proven. The fact of the matter is, it's the underlying obfuscation of the currency which is responsible for all this, and all the Board of Governors can do is increase or decrease interest rates or the availability of money, the credit worthiness requirements. But they can't stop lending because it's impossible to do so, because in order to maintain a vital circulation, the obfuscation itself requires us to perpetually borrow interest and principal as an ever-increasing sum of artificial indebtedness and an eventually terminal sum of artificial indebtedness. He goes on then to lament that America and individual investors are beginning to turn away from the stock market. Well, the sad thing is that we resort to such a thing at all when in fact it's a further device of our exploitation with the false carrot that obfuscating the currency and perpetually manipulating the cost or value of things so that we are compelled to participate in this further crime against us, hoping that our money won't be devalued when eventually it only can be, and when eventually the multiplication of artificial indebtedness results in our complete defeasance. This is the really sad thing. You don't lament, if you understand these issues, that America and individual investors are beginning to turn away from the stock market. He further goes on to lament, some banks, many of which receive government bailouts, are not investing in small businesses, nor in the creation of jobs. The private sector is not creating jobs, and in fact, most businesses are freezing their employment levels. Well, even worse, they're actually, downscaling, employment levels. But you don't complain that banks aren't investing, which means that they own our business. Privatization, private enterprise, free enterprise is not about banks coming to own us through an obfuscation of the currency. And if you're going to fix that, there's no point in lamenting this. Show us that this was the cause of losing these jobs and that there is one and one only solution, which in fact there is, because there is one and one only solution for inflation and deflation. There is one only solution for systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property, and there's one and one only solution for inherent, irreversible multiplication of artificial indebtedness into terminal indebtedness. He goes on further to lament that confidence in the United States economic leadership at home and around the world is waning, when in fact no confidence whatever should exist, because the very imposition of the Federal Reserve System and the persistence of this crime against us all this while is a evidence testament of a fact that there should be no confidence in the United States economic leadership at home or around the world at all, because all that has ever done is promote the Federal Reserve as a currency as a purported reserve currency of the world, which has indebted the world in a like pattern, so that although we began at certain somewhat different times on this second life cycle of the so-called Federal Reserve System, and the rates of failure are multiplied by the particular localized rates of interest around the world, we're all going down together. Why? Because this currency, this purposed obfuscation of the currency for the object of exploitation, can only result in terminal failure. Kucinich goes on, the aforementioned conditions require comprehensive action by the United States Congress to create full employment, invest in America, and secure our nation's long-term economic, social, and political future. And that such action is within our constitutional right and responsibility. But he hasn't provided a word of what that responsibility actually is, or how we are to achieve it. He goes on to say that abolishing private money creation can be achieved, and we've already mentioned this, with minimal disruption of current banking operations, regulation, and supervision. This is just absolutely not true. We have to get rid of banking in order to resolve our problems. So whatever he's proposing here, which he hasn't even made even the least evident in 8 pages of going on and on and on, detailing the results of all this, is leading us nowhere. We have no idea that this purported bill solves anything as yet. In his detailing of the purposes of this act, he really proves his inability to field the issues. He says in the second purpose that a purpose of this act is to abolish the creation of money or purchasing power by private persons through lending against deposits by means of fractional reserve banking or by